Navarro Media is a left-wing media organisation which earlier this week had its YouTube channel deleted for violating the community guidelines. No proper explanation was given, and after a backlash from fans of Navarro Media, as well as calls to have the channel reinstated by the likes of the Free Speech Union and Spiked Online, YouTube's decision was eventually reversed. Now, they claimed it was a human error. But is big tech censorship getting out of control, and will the left start to realise that it affects all of us? Here to discuss this is Spike's editor, Tom Slater. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
I was expecting a round of applause there, but, you know, you people are not very giving.
You have to force it. You know.
I know it doesn't count, does it, if you have to ask for it?
I don't feel
welcome, Tom. Thank you for coming on. So would you want to just talk us through a little bit of what happened here with Navarro Media this week? Because it all seemed to happen very quickly.
Yeah, so Tuesday morning they got an email from YouTube saying that their account had been permanently deleted for breaching community guidelines around scam, spam and commercially deceptive content.
Yeah.
So it was a complete mistake, obviously. They made a lot of noise about it. They put out a statement. As you were saying, there was this big backlash, not just from their supporters, but principled defenders of freedom of speech. And within about 2 hours, it was reinstated.
But that was quite quick, because it normally takes months with YouTube, doesn't it?
It can often take a very long time. I mean, one of the things that this raises is the fact that if you don't have a big media following, then what is your recourse? These are big faceless corporations. There's often not a human on the other end of that email necessarily. So it raises one thing there. But I think, you know, aside from the fact that this did seem to be a kind of act of fat-fingered incompetence rather than something which was actually politically motivated censorship, I think many of us suspected that going into this. It still demonstrates the power that is concentrated in the hands of so few oligarchs and how much of an impact that can have on our media and on public discourse when these acts of silencing happen, whether they're intentional or not.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to talk to you wrote a very, very good article about this week, and you were making this very interesting point about how when big tech tends to censor people, it's normally actually right-leaning accounts, or certainly accounts that are ideologically opposed to YouTube. But in this case, it wasn't, because Navarro Media are very much left-leaning, are very much kind of, I would say their viewpoints are quite sympathetic to Silicon Valley and to the ideology of identity politics, for instance, a scepticism around free speech. Because am I right in thinking that that's their position? Because you quote a couple of tweets. Have we got those tweets, actually? You quote a couple of tweets by a member of staff at Navarro, and this is Gary McQuiggan, and he said, "It's not censorship when a private company decides to remove you from its platform. You don't have an inalienable right to a Twitter account." Then after the ban, he put this one out. "Whether or not you agree with what we publish, it shouldn't be the whim of giant tech companies to delete us overnight with no explanation." That's quite an about-face.
What changed? That's my... But no, it's quite obvious.
So what happened there?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, as of a year ago, he sounds like a free marketeer. You know, these companies can do whatever they want. Now, as soon as you get a taste of that censorship, even if it's unintentional, you quickly change your tune. And whilst I think this is still a serious issue that we should still discuss, or a serious case that we should still discuss, I don't think it could have escaped many people's attention that a group of people who have spent a lot of time downplaying big tech censorship, at worst, possibly even cheering it in some respects as well, suddenly think they're Salman Rushdie as soon as their account gets accidentally deleted for 2 hours. You know, so it's interesting, but I think it just speaks to the fact that the woke left in particular, and I say that specifically because there's a lot of people on the left who get swallowed up by this, gender-critical feminists, you know, or in large part women who are often socialists and left-wingers who have been kicked off of Twitter, who also face, you know, mob censorship in real life and all the rest of it. It's not exclusively a left-right thing. But the woke left in particular just have refused to learn that kind of age-old lesson of censorship, which is if you don't oppose it, even when it's your enemy, it will eventually come back to bite you. In this case, it didn't. It was an accident, but that's not to say that the people who make these decisions will always agree with the likes of Navarro Media, and that seems to be something that, again, isn't dawning on people.
I mean, it does. I mean, I should say that we did invite Navarro Media to speak to us, because it would have been good to hear their point of view on this and whether people's minds have changed about this. Because I think it was terrible that the account got just banned with no explanation, nothing like that. And the people that I know and that I've spoken to who have been in that situation, often they appeal and then they get an automated response. And sometimes they go, well, more often than not, actually, they're not told what it is they've done, which is straight out of the trial by Kafka, where you've done something wrong, but they won't tell you what your crime is. Are the big tech companies a bit out of control when it comes to this?
Well, I think you've got to think about how much they monopolise their particular areas. So YouTube has north of 2 billion regular monthly users. It's the video platform. So if you're a videographer, if you make documentaries, even if you're a broadcaster, YouTube is an incredibly important way in which you reach people. So if you're denied access to that on the basis of your political opinions or even just a glitch, it has a real material impact on your ability to get out there. And the thing about these platforms is the thing that makes them so good and such a good platform to be on is because they monopolise. It's because of that network effect, as it's called in the jargon, because everyone's on it and everyone who's producing content is on it. So it just shows how much not only economic power is concentrated in those big Silicon Valley tech companies, but it's power over free speech in the sense of how you can actually materially exercise that right in the digital world.
Okay,
so you've got to take it very seriously.
Let me push back against that a little bit. To take Gary McQuiggan's point from the tweet that we showed earlier, these are private companies, right? Have they not got a right to decide who is on their platform and what they say? What's wrong with that?
Well, I think the question is, have they become something a little bit different, is a core example. Because we're not talking here about a niche little website in which people are there to just, share pictures of their kids or to discuss privately. It's very much marketed as an open platform. But also, a lot of these platforms are the platform, if you see what I mean.
Right.
That's, to me, is a markedly different kind of thing. And we see this. We recognise that when, say, Trump was kicked off of Facebook, Twitter and YouTube in a row, how much you notice that he just kind of disappeared from the discussion in a kind of way, even though he was still serving President of the United States. We all recognise this. It's the fact that these firms have so much power and reach is why we all engage with them and why we all use them. So to pretend that it's just the same as someone, deciding to kick you out of a restaurant because they don't like the cut of your jib and you're being rude to the staff, it's not the same thing. Unless that restaurant can fit 2 billion people and it happens to be the only place where politics is discussed.
Unless the Wetherspoons are quite big. But, I mean, what can you do about this on a practical level? What can you actually do if Silicon Valley has this kind of power? Has this kind of oligopoly over all of these platforms? How can we possibly do anything about this? Governments can't. The Biden administration certainly doesn't seem to have an appetite to do anything about this. What do you think can be done on a practical level?
Well, I think the difficulty is where there is appetite to do something about the internet, it's to go in the opposite direction.
Right.
So you see this from the Democrats in America. You see this with the government and their online safety bill, which I'm sure you'll have talked about from time to time, which they're trying to bring forward, which would basically put more pressure on social media companies of a certain size to censor what they call legal but harmful content.
And this is the current Tory government
exactly.
doing this,
So to the extent that there is appetite to look into the question of these big tech firms and what people are allowed to post on them, the energy is all in the opposite direction.
Yes.
But at the same time, I don't think that means we should just close the door on that, on the question of should there be some sort of state intervention to push in the opposite direction, to say that if you're of a certain size, if you are in effect an extension of the public sphere, then if people are expressing views which are perfectly legal to express on a platform or in a newspaper or wherever else, why should it be illegal here? I think that's why shouldn't it not be allowed here, I should say. That's something that we should talk about.
Given what's happened to Navarro Media this week, and there have been other examples of left-leaning accounts that have been booted off the platform, do you think there is going to be a kind of mindset? This is why I would have liked to have someone from Navarro here to talk about this. Do you think there is the potential for people to change their minds about this, for the kind of the left and the right to work together? Because it is in both of their interests, I think, to push back a little bit against the power of big tech.
It is in both of their interests, but at the same time, I don't see any appetite for that, really. I mean, there's been some discussion about it in recent days, but I don't think there's been any reassessment of the positions they might have taken whether it was conspiracy theorists or hard right-wingers or even people spewing misinformation, because those are the hard cases. It's people who you really despise, people who are objectively wrong. If you don't stick up for their free speech, then you're not holding the line for it. And I just think the problem is that the die is cast too much now. And also, as you were saying, you say it's within their interest, but at the same time, I think one of the reasons that a lot of people on the woke left have been so blasé about big tech censorship, despite the fact they like to pretend to be anti-capitalist a lot of the time, is because deep down they knew it wasn't really aimed at them. They knew that those community guidelines weren't written with them in mind. And I think that's part of the reason why, even now, there might be some more talk about the left needs to talk
There's
more
a bit,
about
isn't there? There's a bit of that going on.
I think it's a little bit skin deep.
I mean, because Ash Sarkar from Navarro Media this week said something along the lines of the right and the left have to work together about this issue. And surely that just makes sense. And ultimately we will get there, perhaps.
Potentially, but I just don't necessarily see that reassessment. I mean, even in terms of the kind of bidding of Trump, it seems that the most people from this part of politics can muster is to say, it made me feel a bit queasy, but ultimately it was the right decision. It just shows how, if there is going to be some sort of awakening of this question, it's pretty early.
And finally, on the online safety bill and on this idea of online anonymity, which the Tories are now pushing for, do you think that will have some kind of impact on the real world? Do you think if we did make all accounts anonymous, if we clamped down on the possibility of abuse online, then we would be able to curb real-world harm? Do you think that's likely?
I just don't think you can draw a line between these two things. You know, the internet is a very different space, and I think we have to treat these things on their own terms. I mean, and with the online anonymity thing, it's just such a terrible idea. I mean, the nature of public debate at the moment, something that I'm sure you touch on all the time, stripping online anonymity from these platforms are not just going to be a problem for Russian dissidents or Belarusian journalists. It's a problem for gender-critical people who maybe work in social work and feel that they can't voice these sort of opinions in certain settings. It's even in this country that there is this stifling climate. People feel the need to be anonymous. And particularly given the fact that the spur for this was a real-world act of violence, which, as far as I could tell, had no connection whatsoever with online trolling. It's a bizarre response as well as a pretty authoritarian one, definitely.
Tom Slater, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.